I mentioned that all the PRT objects can be used, and at this point I'm actually going to show you only how you can use splines using another object. Let's use this same spline and this same emitter, but this time won't be driving them with the spray. I'll remove the spray from the list. I'll remove even the wind from the list. And let's say that I wanted to create motion, particles emitted on this object, and then following a general motion of this spline. What I can do is create the PRT here object, and PRT here creates particles along the spline. This is part of Krakatoa. I can control the spacing in the viewport and then render time. Spacing of 1 appears to be good enough. I can display the tangents, and you'll see that the tangents are actually following exactly the spline. So all I have to do is add a magma modifier on top of the stack and create an output and say this will be velocity, and this velocity will be set to the tangent. And because the tangent has a length of 1, but I need a relatively strong influence, I'm going to multiply it by some factor. I'll try 200 and see how that goes. So at this point, this spline should be a valid source for Stoke to create particles. And I'll pick it. Here it is, the PRT here. Now the PRT here will be used with the velocity channel that I just created, and I'll use no fluid motion and the size of, I don't know, I'll try 10 and see how that goes. I'll disable even the simulation to disk, and as you can see, my particles are being emitted from the plane, and then they're following that same spline that we did before, but this time the following is based on PRT here, which is generating velocities based on the tangents. This implies that I can create any number of splines. I can convert them all to particles and create my own velocity field defined by splines, turn them to PRT here, copy the tangent into velocity, and I have my completely customized velocity field. In the Ember videos, we were showing how to build a nuclear explosion, like a mushroom cloud, in a similar way, create splines, create velocities out of them, and get the particles moving to that field. That's the same idea. And of course, I can actually emit from particles. I already have a scene prepared somewhere here in Stoke webinar, and that one is spline emission. I have created a PRT here, and this PRT here is distributing particles on this object. And from each one of those points that I had generated, I have already pre-simulated that one. I'm emitting from each one many particles, and this is producing this wiry distribution. Of course, I can go and switch it to actually emit randomly in space as we did before and make it more interesting and so on. But in general, emitting from splines is completely plausible, but just tweaking the parameters of your the spacing here is really high. So if I create this distribution here and resimulate, now I'm creating more particles. I can stop and I can go and say emit within 1 unit around each point, and that gives me the random distribution. Or I can select this here and say emit exactly as many particles as they are particles in the original PRT here. So I can go here and say use the seed count and simulate. And there is also the option to emit only from new particles, but for that, this object would have to actually generate an ID channel. And since I don't have an ID channel in a PRT here, I'm copying the index into the ID. And at this point, if I go and simulate with these settings, it should be emitting only in the first frame, and then they move around. So as you can see, a spline, even though not directly usable as a source, is indirectly usable through the PRT here, and you can create really neat effects of splines moving in space and spawning more particles.